Thank you for joining us today for this special audio video experience. We are live from the Michigan Farm Bureau headquarters and powered by your favorite virtual meeting service. Welcome to this, a deep dive into Discussion Meet. Today, we'll be tackling the topic of environmental stewardship on the farm. I am joined by count them two amazing Farm Bureau conservation and regulatory relations specialists, Laura Campbell and Tess Van Gorder. I'm your enthusiastic host, Ben Butcher, joining you here behind the big Farm Bureau microphone of knowledge. I myself am proud to serve on the State Young Farmer Committee and to be a part of your day today. For those of you who may be new to the discussion meet, it is a competition hosted by your favorite agricultural organization, the Michigan Farm Bureau. In this competition, competitors will have 20 minutes to discuss a topic with their fellow competitors, attempting to identify challenges within the topic area and solutions to those challenges, doing so in a way that is constructive and socially acceptable. The discussion topic that we're going to work on today is farmers and ranchers are at the forefront of environmental stewardship. From soil health to local ecosystems, producers are concerned about how to be both environmentally and financially sustainable. So, how can farmers and ranchers effectively advance environmental stewardship while balancing the needs of their farms? I'm excited for this conversation today. Our guests, Laura and Tess, are fantastically suited for this conversation. I'd like to give you a little bit of background on both of these amazing individuals. Laura Campbell is born and raised in Ohio and comes from a small hobby farm. She earned a bachelor's at Michigan State University and a master's at Johns Hopkins University, both in environmental policy. She has since blended her passion of farming with that of environmental policy and joined the Michigan Farm Bureau as the Senior Conservation and Regulatory Relations Specialist. Laura, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We should also introduce Tess Van Gorder, who was born and raised here in Troy, Michigan. Tess attended the University of Michigan studying environmental policy and has served Michigan Farm Bureau for 7 years. She focuses on environmental issues such as ag recycling, manure management, climate, and sustainability. Tess, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So we want to go ahead and get started here with something that we've talked about right before, and that was the sustainability journey. So when a farmer decides to take his farm, his or her farm down the sustainability path, what does that journey look like? Tess, let's take this question to you.
So I think one of the important things to think about before we dive into the weeds of cover crops or pasture, things like that, is to think about what you want this to look like and what makes sense for your operation. Because I think a lot of times we can get caught up, whether it's sustainability or climate smart or regenerative ag, there's so many buzzwords out there. When in reality, you should, think about a program and technical assistance and whatever else that meets your farm where it's at. Because we all know one size fits all doesn't really work, especially for Michigan agriculture. And so think about, what are you trying to solve with your sustainability journey? So, for example, if you see during rainstorms, you see sediment runoff and you are losing soil, and then with that soil's nutrients, what are some practices that make sense to help keep the soil in your fields where it's going to help grow your crops or grow your pasture or anything like that? And so this is a sort of looking at, okay, that is a solution to a pain point I have. I think anything from something in field to, do I have, for example, a high energy process on my farm? And is there an opportunity to look at ways to either make that less expensive for me, as in terms of like an energy bill or energy efficiency? And is there ways I can implement solutions on my farm that both deliver the environmental benefit of, using less power and having the same outcomes, or generating your own power and things like that? And then also and that economic benefit too, if you can make that pencil out. Because one of the things I always say with farmers, with folks who are creating programs for farmers, is that farmers cannot be environmentally sustainable if they are not economically sustainable. If the farm is not there, they will not be environmentally sustainable. So we have to make sure that programs meet farmers where they're at and where they are in that journey, because it's okay that, there could be someone who is way ahead and using drones and AI and all these other things. And then you're saying, okay, I want to start a little bit simpler because AI is weird for me. And so it's really important, I think, to search out resources and folks, trusted advisors that will help you along that journey based on your farm and your unique situation.
Yeah, that's a great point.
like
And
it.
Tess, a couple of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking about the sustainability journey is how overwhelming it can be to get started or to even figure out what your goals can be or should be. Can you talk a little bit about the MAEAP program or NRCS or some of the other options that are available, even just to help you get started with your planning, whether it's for your farm business management or specific environmental goals, just to lay that plan out on paper so that you can see what it is?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we're very proud of in Michigan is our Michigan Agriculture Environmental Assurance Program, or the MAEAP program. So I'm sure many of you have seen the signs in the countryside that says this farm is environmentally verified. And I know some even have a proud member of their county farm bureau sign, which is awesome. And so that is really a great point to start at, because it takes a look at a technician will come out to your farm and look at your farm and say, okay, we're going to follow this list of this risk assessment that says these are all the things that are happening on your farm, and this is some things that may need to be changed. And that is a great starting point and a very robust starting point, because it's not just looking at, okay, putting cover crops, no-till, things like that. It's looking at your fuel storage. It's looking at containment. Do you have emergency plans in place to protect yourself, your employees, and your family on the farm? And it also does include things like cover crops. Do you have setbacks for wells? And so it's really that holistic approach to the whole farm environmental risk management. And so the great thing about that is because they can point you in the direction of things. Hey, like you may want to, are you interested in cover crops? Are you interested in no-till or things like this? But it also looks at, how do we reduce risk? Because I think that's also a great conversation to have on your farm, is that, yes, I think there's a multifaceted approach to a lot of, some of these sustainability conversations. And one of the ones that I really enjoy is how do we reduce farmers' risk? Because there's so many things that are outside of our control. I mean, even just the weather for a lot of us are saying, okay, like how do we reduce risk of if there's a gully washer, if there is a emergency, freak accident, how do we reduce that risk to us, the environment, any employees you have, and to your business? And so that's, I think MAEAP is a great way to go there. And hopefully through your technician, you should be able to find other resources. So they're a great starting point. If you say, hey, I have these questions, they may say, oh, you need to reach out to, I'm going to put you in contact with my NRCS contact that works out of our office, and say, this is how we can get you signed up for cost share. Or they may have other funds available depending on where you are in the state, whether it's money from a non-point source fund to help implement a watershed management plan. So help, protect the waters in your area, or if there's a special, time limited program going on, or if you are in a special area of the state. So you hear a lot about the Western Lake Erie Basin. They have a lot of different programs that go on all the time that may not be available elsewhere. And so really leveraging that technician and your verifier, because most of our verifiers have either been around for a while, are farmers themselves, and really know a lot of great connections. And so I think part of that too is something I've learned at Farm Bureau, is leveraging the network, because even if Laura or I don't know the answer, we can go find the answer. Or if we don't know the person, we can go find the person, because there's a lot of great people working in conservation. So really leverage, your USDA resources will be a lot of cost share, and maybe some additional programming. And so there's a lot of things, from everything from manure storage to cover crops, and a number of different programs that you can pursue. And so Laura, I don't know if you have anything to add to.
Yeah, absolutely. Just basically, it can be a lot to try to approach a sustainability plan for your farm. And it can seem really overwhelming, which is why Tess did a great job summarizing some of the ways that you can approach your plan and some of the help that's available out there to help you get started. Again, because it's not just a matter of willy-nilly picking a practice, picking a program, and just jumping into it with both feet. You got to do it strategically, not only because that's going to be best for how to incorporate new practices, new technologies onto your farm, but also a way to make sure that what you're doing achieves your goals in a way that is affordable for your farm and ultimately doesn't take too big of a knock out of your profitability, or best yet, increases your profitability.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I get skeptical, and I'm sure Laura does too, of things where you say you have to do all the things all at once. And really, you know, from a risk perspective, from a profitability perspective, you want to take those bite-sized pieces. So one, you don't change 12 things on your farm and then you're at one point you're like, I don't know what's going on anymore. Like where did I end up? And so can you see those changes? And it's okay to take those bite-sized pieces. Again, you know, every farm is different. And we have to realize that, you know, folks who are saying you have to upend the whole system all at once, you know, is that really going to be the best sustainable long-term outcome for your farm?
Absolutely.
So I think one thing maybe we should talk about here, I think you guys are doing a great job talking about our sustainability plan and building those plans and leveraging our assets and our government agencies to help us build those. But when it comes to these plans, let's just take like a 30,000-foot overview. What could be in those plans? What are some environmental practices that farmers are implementing or can implement on their farms? And not to get in the weeds on any of them, but just something that as you're preparing for this discussion meet contest, you might be able to go home and research, say, a cover crop if you've never heard that before. So, what are some of these environmental practices that we are seeing on farms right now?
Mm-hmm. I think a good way to think about it is to sort of break it down by the elements on your farm. Think about your conservation practices and the goals that you might have in terms of what are my needs for my field's production area, whether that's a greenhouse or a livestock barn or a crop field or an apple orchard or any one of the other 300 plus commodities that farmers in Michigan grow. The second is going to be your farmyard area where you're storing your fuel, your chemicals, where your water supply might be, where your buildings might be, where your home might be. So thinking about more of those infrastructure elements. And then another element to think about is sort of your non-production areas. Do you have habitat you're trying to protect? Do you have a hunting area that you want to be able to use? Do you have a forest that you want to be able to pull timber from, or other areas that either because you want to or because you have to, because of regulatory controls, protect as a natural area and not produce as a farm. So those kind of three areas are sort of your big buckets when you think about your sustainability story. And that can really help to drive not only what you prioritize first, for being able to make changes and improvements on your farm, but also then to sort of chunk out the involvement and the costs and and anything that might be involved in terms of time or engineering or other things that may hold you up in your process as well. And it makes it a little bit more manageable. Not that this is universal for everyone, but most of the time I advise go after your fields first. Those tend to be the lowest cost and the easiest ones to implement new practices and technologies on. They also tend to be less expensive than your farmyard, your buildings, your infrastructure, and other things, while providing you an actual return on your investment. It gets a little bit squishier when you start talking about livestock farms, because a lot of those production area techniques and practices end up tending to be around your farmyard. So manure storage and and your livestock housing and your bedding and how are you going to manage your animal care routine? Those things can get pricey really quick. But if there's something that you can do to just kind of stick your toe in, focus on those fields, focus on the crops or the forage or any other materials that you are growing, because soil health not only gives you a really good return on your investment, it's also usually lower cost to achieve.
And I would take, I think Laura made a lot of great points. If you are sort of the captain of your own destiny, and I know a lot of things that have changed even at my time as Farm Bureau in terms of the climate and sustainability realm, is that there's a lot of private companies, whether it's a, you know, Star of the West at Kellogg's or Kellanova or whatever their name is now after their many acquisitions, or a Go-Go Squeeze. There's a lot of different companies that are looking to work with their supply chain to implement practices. And this could be, like I said, there's all the buzzwords. You can have climate smart, regenerative, soil health. I really tend to think of things as just conservation because the buzzwords are just too much. But in this case, one, you should know what the buzzword means to a program that you may or may not be participating in, because that will tell you, that will help you understand what their goals are. And then also they may have goals in terms of practices that they may ask you to implement and things like that. So understanding when you go into a program is that I've got a lot of questions about, especially carbon credits, is that, understanding what the expectation is of you. And I think one of the things, while I made a joke about, AI being a lot, I think one of the things in this sustainability conversation is if you're looking to monetize sort of those outcomes, because you can increase your carbon sequestration, reduce your greenhouse gas emissions, and there's other, if you improve habitat, there's all sorts of ways to monetize this. It comes down to data. And so technology is really important to be able to collate all of that information, is if you want to monetize that and make, the return on investment work for your farm, there's going to be a lot of questions about, sometimes I've seen ones that's like, how many gallons of fuel did you use while you were out in the tractor on the field? So like it gets really into the nitty gritty. And I think that's a really important point in terms of like when you're putting this plan together, where are you getting funding from? And is there expectations that come with that funding? Because I think with NRCS, it's a little, I would call it simpler, but their goals are more straightforward.
Not simpler.
Not simpler. But it says, you say, hello at NRCS, I want money to do cover crops. And they say, here's your money to do cover crops, do it in this way. Okay, you did the cover crops. And so, but I think, if you go in through a sustainability program, that company likely has goals of their own, whether it's they want a certain number of acres in regenerative agriculture and whatever that definition means to them. They want to reduce their supply chain emissions. And so that will add elements to what that looks like for when you're planning that for your farm. And hopefully, my preference is that these companies that they're looking for farmers to invest in whatever practices they may be, help offset some of the cost, help provide some of that technical assistance to help you figure out, okay, this is my farm, this is my context, how do I do this and be successful? So I think that's another thing, is that if you want funding or to get paid for some of these outcomes, needing to understand the stipulations that come from some of those funding sources.
It can be hard to try to parse through all of the potential programs to participate in as well, and that's why we tend to really rely on pointing farmers toward resources like your local conservation district, your local MSU extension service, your meat program technicians, folks who can provide you that unbiased advice and can look at your farm as an individual entity, because no two farms are the same. No two farms are going to implement a sustainability plan the same. And that's why getting that personal advice can really help, even beyond what advice you may already be getting from your crop consultant, your retailer, your input provider, those other folks who are out there doing a great job and are consummate professionals. And they live in the world they live in. A lot of times they can't see the entire farm for what it is, because that's just not the business they're in. That's your job as the farmer to see the entire farm and the business that you're in.
Awesome. Thank you very much for helping recap that, talking about how we need to use our resources to help us build that environmental plan. Because when you think about the world of sustainability, environmental stewardship, there's so many things that everybody wants to throw at you, and everybody wants you to get you involved in. And how do you know which one's right for your farm? And it sounds like we need to use our resources to figure out which practice is right for you. And I guess that leads me to my next question. From a policy standpoint, there's a lot of pushes in the environmental realm of financial assistance policies, different policies on how to handle the land in our ecosystems. What is Michigan Farm Bureau working on within that realm, or the National Farm Bureau, as we look down the road as at environmental sustainability and stewardship?
I think one of the things we touched on with our jokes about NRCS not necessarily being simpler is that how do we get programs in place that uh, are accessible to farmers? And I think accessibility means a lot of different things in conservation. Is one, does the program make sense to implement on a farm? So a lot of what Laura and I do for you is go out if folks are creating programs to make sure like, hey, that doesn't make sense for this type of operation, or like what your goals are and how do we make it more accessible. And then also there, I think, is the paperwork and bureaucracy burden, which can go both public and private. So I'm not here to bash on anyone in particular, but for data, there's a lot of paperwork and a lot of input and a lot of time. There's a lot of paperwork with some of the federal programs. And so how do we reduce those barriers? Because, if folks want to implement conservation on their operation, if they want to have solar panels on their barns to help reduce some of their costs, like we should be making it straightforward. This shouldn't be a pop quiz. This shouldn't be like, okay, did I speak the bureaucracy language correct today? And so how do we make it accessible from there? And then also, how do we advocate for an equitable, opportunity for them, whether that's providing technical assistance, whether that's the cost share payment, whether that's the carbon contract. And so all of those things play into the dynamics in terms of, can we make it simple? Can we make it easily accessible? Because I don't think both in the voluntary and regulatory realm, none of this should be like, there shouldn't be confusion. I shouldn't have to have, 3 degrees and, some magic 8 ball to like try and interpret what do you want from me. And so that's one of the things we do every day across the environmental, voluntary, and regulatory sphere, is saying, hey, if I'm having problems, like this is not going to be accessible to the broader population who doesn't do this work every day. And I think that's a really important thing, both from the regulatory side and the voluntary side, in terms of how you're implementing, is making sure that everything is laid out on the table. It's common sense. There's no trick questions. There's no secret knocks you need to be able to access whatever resource or regulation or permit or whatever else you're doing.
Ben, you brought up a great point earlier about Farm Bureau policy and how our policy drives a lot of these conversations. Tess and I sometimes joke that we go to meetings so that you guys, the members, don't have to. But none of what we do is possible without Farm Bureau policy, without that grassroots, member-developed position on everything related to farming. Our Farm Bureau policy book at the state and at the national level, those are our Bibles. That's what we use to have those conversations in committees with legislators, with universities, with regulators, to tell them, hey, if you're designing a program, whether it's to manage a pollution source, regulate an activity, or encourage conservation practices, this is what our farmers have said they need. And so participating with your local Farm Bureau, with your state Farm Bureau, getting involved in policy. I always say the cool kids go to state annual meeting. And the reason for that is because from our perspective, and in the work that we do, and in the work that all farmers do, policy is at the heart of it. Knowing what it is that we want, knowing what it is that is important to farmers, is the most important voice that we have, whether it's in Lansing or in Washington, D.C.
Well, I think to that point, you help, as the membership, help us identify holes and problems and opportunities. If you say, hey, I talked to a friend in another state and they had this program that worked really well, or like, I've had a lot of issues trying to get in with a NRCS program and I've either gotten denied or just it's taken years. And so a lot of those, like, it feels like maybe, that could be just complaining, but really in reality, those can be funneled through policy development to say, hey, this is what I want to see from my NRCS office, from my conservation district, from the MAEAP program, from the regulatory structure. And so those are really important things as you're seeing the different experience. Not every farm is the same. And so your experience in any of those realms can be different. And so how do we as farmers advocate for you to help you be sustainable both economically and environmentally?
Mhm.
Perfect. Thank you very much for touching on the policy side of this question. And I think I kind of want to wrap up with this last question here is how do we advance environmental stewardship on the farm? There's so many of our fellow farmers who are out there are happy with where they're at. How do you nudge them to at least consider if that needs to be changed, right? How do we know that it needs to be changed? And then if it does, how do we change it? And how do farmers who are already implementing these practices continue to share those from your perspective? How do we continue to push this further along the path?
One of the things you said in the introduction, when you talked about both environmental and economic sustainability, I think really holds the key to the answer on how do we move the needle, for lack of a better term, on not only using good environmental stewardship on our farms, but also how do we advance policy? How do we advance regulation and conservation programs? There's always sort of a bell curve of how people adopt new practices, new technologies, how they comply with regulations. There's the early adopters who are the real innovators. They're out there. They're the ones that people talk about at the coffee shops. Oh, did you see what Jim did on his farm? Boy, that's crazy. And those people are the ones who are a lot of times going to find out sort of the pitfalls early on with a new practice, a new technology. And that's great. And we need those folks. Because they're the ones who are sort of our testing ground a lot of times for new practices and new technologies. Then you've got really the middle of the bell curve, which is everybody else. The folks who maybe aren't quite out there on the bleeding edge of trying new things. They want to see that something has been established and it works, but they're willing to look at, hey, is there actually an actual advantage to my business for this? Either because it's going to improve my return on investment, it's going to give me more profitability, or because it's going to save me from future costs due to regulation or cleanup standards. Then you've got kind of the folks who are on the far end of the bell curve. They're the ones who are saying, boy, maybe because I'm close to retirement, or maybe because my farm is in a really, bad financial situation, legal difficulties, family strife, other kinds of things where really I'm just not in the frame of mind to be able to talk about this at all. And so getting from those early adopters to the middle of the bell curve, that's where the economic sustainability comes in. Because whether it's a regulation or a voluntary program, it has to make sense for your farm. There has to be a way to make it to where it either ultimately improves your profitability, or the costs are manageable, or they've been covered by some other financial assistance or program. And everything from finding new and innovative ways to get financial assistance out the door, to finding out whether there are ways to find different vehicles for financial incentives for programs. Does that look like a new crop insurance program? Does that look like an incentive program like some of the ones Tess talked about for carbon sequestration? Does it look like a value-added operation that you add to your farm that, because you design it ahead of time with environmental sustainability in mind, it may cost you a little more upfront, but it's going to provide you a lot of return on the back end because you're going to get improved soil health, or you're going to get an easier path through getting a regulation for your operation and getting those permits done? Or is it going to be something that is going to help you prepare your farm for future generations? Those are the kinds of things that we think about all the time. And for us, there is no difference, no daylight whatsoever between finding options for farms that are environmentally sustainable and finding those that are economically sustainable. One can't go without the other.
And I think one of the things I think about a lot, and I think that a lot of our members think about a lot in terms of relationships. So I think that finding and helping get trusted advisors out in front of farmers to talk about some of these things is really crucial, because farmers want someone who they know, understands what's going on their farm. They want someone who either works with farmers on a regular basis or is a farmer. And I think getting those early adopters or those technical assistance providers, if there's an agronomist or someone kind of going hand in hand, getting those folks in front of farmers, because farmers can sniff out if you have never stepped on a farm before and you're just like talking, you're there, you're in a costume, and they know you don't understand what it means to be a farmer, to have to farm, what you're dealing with on a regular basis. And I think so having the right messenger and in getting those folks in front of farmers is what makes programs and what makes this a better conversation, because farmers feel like that's someone who understands farming. And so again, that has to be a lot of people, because someone who is doing great things in the world of dairy sustainability can't go talk to an apple farmer and have a productive conversation about what sustainability would look like on the apple orchard. And so I think it's important, and we have a lot of great leaders in Farm Bureau as Farm Bureau members who do a lot of cool things on their farm, that partner with various universities to help with field trials, to test out new products, to test out conservation practices. And I think finding those people in your community, and I think that could be something that your county farm bureau or your local farm bureau members can help with, that folks are willing to share. And I think it's finding those folks who are willing to share and say, hey, like, I did cover crops this way and they really didn't work out, but then I added, I used a blend instead of a single species, and that worked out really well for me. And so really finding that community and finding those folks, and how we or the County Farm Bureau can help connect those folks, I think is just a really valuable connection, and really just very sincere. And I think that's, what farmers really respond well to, is being able to find that connection in someone who understands agriculture and understands what it's like to have to take a risk and maybe implement a new practice that, that's a new change is hard, regardless of if it's, a new job or if it's cover crops. So, I mean, finding someone that can kind of ease your mind on like what actually happens and what do I look out for.
I'll put a plug in also, since we spent a lot of time talking about developing your sustainability plan for your farm, right? What's your sustainability journey? Since I spend a lot of my time working with farmers who have gotten nasty, scary letters or visits from regulatory agencies, I will say this too. Before you take on any activity, before you try a new practice, before you clear new farmland, before you purchase more livestock, talk with someone and ask the crucial question, do I need a permit for that? Because 90% of the time, when a farmer gets in trouble for an activity, I'll say 99% of the time, when a farmer gets in trouble for an activity, it's not because they went out there just saying, I don't care what anybody thinks, I'm going to do what I want, it's my farm. 99% of the time, it's because they didn't know that it was a regulated activity. They didn't know that they needed a permit to do something. They didn't know that, some activity that maybe their parents or grandparents did on their farms and never had to ask a soul about is now something that's regulated at the state or federal level. That is a great, again, resource that you can use Farm Bureau for. You can use your conservation district. You can use Your NRCS office, which I know we've been throwing around a lot of acronyms, that's Natural Resources Conservation Service for those who aren't familiar. They're part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and they are the ones who help you with financial assistance and technical assistance for those practices you might want to use. Talk to those folks and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Do I need a permit for that? Your MAEAP technician is a great resource for that, particularly because they keep those conversations confidential, as do we at Farm Bureau. Find out what's needed, find out what the regulations are, if there are any, before you start an activity, because it is a lot cheaper to find out ahead of time, hey, I've got to get this $50 permit, rather than now I'm thousands of dollars in fines later, having to correct and clean up an activity that I never even realized was regulated, which, you know, could have been solved by a phone call. So it's never fun. It's never easy to have to think that way, and to think, before I even get a shovel, you know, what do I need to know about this? But it can help you a lot in the long run.
And we're also there, even if you move the dirt and then get that Nancy grant, we're also here for you to help advocate and help you understand maybe some things that get thrown out that are not at a very common sense level. And so we're there to help interpret the bureaucracy and also help you work through that as well. So, you know, tale of before and after and during. So that's what I think the beauty of having, you know, being part of Michigan Farm Bureau.
Mm-hmm.
In just a second here, I'm going to ask both of you for your final thoughts. And in your final thoughts, thinking about some resources that discussion meet competitors would want to look at, maybe things to further investigate. And then while you're thinking about those and developing those, I just want to kind of summarize what I've taken away from today's chat. We started off the conversation talking about our sustainability journey and how that's a plan to bring our farm into these sustainability practices, and how we have to have a plan and a goal in mind before we start. And then we're going to take bite-sized chunks off of that. But before we can even get to those bite-sized chunks, we really want to work with our resources, whether that's our MAEAP technician who we work with and partner with to come and help us build that plan, or NRCS or some other Farm Bureau operatives can come and help us with that plan, but making sure we have a solid plan before we start tackling that plan. And when we start to implement some of those conservation practices, areas that we're going to want to start to think of is our storage facility areas, our production facility areas, and also our general farm area. So those are three different areas that we're going to think about when we think about what practices we'll implement. And again, we're going to use our resources to help develop what practices we're going to put into each one of those areas. And we talked about different funding sources. There's several private industry funding sources that were mentioned here today, and that you can find online. And then there's also some government funded sources that are definitely out there as well. And then we took the conversation into grassroots policy development and how being an active member in Farm Bureau and developing our policy playbook helps our staff members do a great job for us and making sure that they advocate what we're looking for, so that together we all win, the farm and the environment. And that's both financially and environmentally. And we talked about, lastly, how important financial assistance is to the adoption of these practices. And these financial assistance dollars can either come from the government, or they can be found by returns on investments in the farm by implementing these environmental practices. So these are some of the things that I've taken away from the conversation today. And like I said, there's so many things that was just not all the time in the world to work on these. So as our competitors are continuing to look for resources and scouring the internet as they make their final preparations, what are a few things they should keep in mind?
So I think some of the resources I would add to that list. One of the things, so conservation districts, your local conservation district, I would reach out to them. Keep in mind, some of them are like your county farm bureaus. There's not necessarily exactly one in each county. So, you know, if you need help, sometimes your regional manager can help you with that. MSU Extension, so there's a lot of different folks on staff there. They have conservation agronomists, you know, regenerative ag specialists, environmental specialists, and then commodity specialists. Keep those folks in mind. And then even just searching online on MSU Extension, they have a plethora of resources that you may see sometimes pop up in the Michigan Farm News. I would also add, especially your commodity groups. I would also, especially, so I think about dairy comes to mind most often. They have a very robust sustainability commitment, and then working on tools to help folks navigate the conservation space. And so they have a new navigator tool that just came out, I think either this year or late last year, that helps navigate, okay, what is a cover crop? What should I know? And really robust resources. And frankly, for those general resources, it doesn't matter if you're, you do dairy or you grow crops. I mean, cover crops are cover crops, and they don't necessarily care what field you're on. But so think about those tools that some of those national or some of your commodity groups might be able to point you in. It could be a tool and a resource. It could be a program. So for example, Farmers for Soil Health is something that has come out, and Michigan Corn does a lot of work in that. And so really using the network. And so again, coming back, you can do Farm Bureau staff, so we may be aware of those programs. We might be able to say, hey, go to your local conservation district because they have this program going, or go to NRCS because this program just opened up for application. And so really take advantage of some of those other, organizations you may or may not be a part of, and some of those organizations that are existing in your community. And so I think and finding your trusted advisors, whether that looks like technical assistance, whether that looks like, someone in your community that has done what you would like to do. And so finding those folks that understand agriculture and understand kind of, your context, or can help you with your context, because I think that we want that person to feel secure, because it can be a risk to change this on your farm, because it's not like you just change something and everything falls into place. A lot of times I've heard it referred to as like a puzzle piece. If you move a puzzle piece a certain way and take it out of the puzzle, you can't just fit it back into the puzzle. There's a cascading effects of changes that may go through your operation. And so having someone you can trust and rely on to help you through that process is, I think, something that cannot be understated.
I would add to that, and kind of as a concluding thought to wrap up our conversation, Michigan is called the Great Lakes State. Water touches and affects everything that we do. Farmers, if you're not already thinking about water quality, water quantity, water access, you should be. And I don't just say that because Michigan is the Great Lakes State. I say that because a lot of what you do on your farm, and a lot of the practices that you implement along your sustainability journey can do double and triple and quadruple duty if you think about it from the lens of what's best for my farm, what is best to keep what I put on my fields there and not running off into waterways. What can I do to improve soil health so that I can smooth out those rough edges between too much rain and not enough rain? What can I do to make sure that my livestock are happy and healthy, and that I'm making the best use possible of the nutrients that they produce from the food that they eat? Thinking about it from that lens of everything that I do has an impact. Everything that I do affects not only myself, my farm, my family, but also the surrounding community, my watershed, and the state and the Great Lakes. Helps to really put in perspective the importance and the value of being that good steward, of living up to the expectation and the reputation that farmers have of being great environmental stewards. You look at any public survey of who do they trust, who do they think is a good operator, and who do they think is a person who's taking care of them and the environment. Farmers almost always rank top of the list. People trust farmers. People know that farmers are the experts at what they need. And so it's our job as farmers and as members of an agricultural organization to make that happen, not only for the success of our farms, but also so that we have a safe and affordable and abundant food supply here in the state and in the country, and also that we're taking good care of the resources that gave us that great food supply.
Well, Tess and Laura, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for imparting all of your knowledge and wisdom upon us. And discussion meet competitors, thank you so much for watching today. You can find more resources on the discussion meet page on the Michigan Farm Bureau website. And make sure that you continue to look for all these other resources, and we wish you the best of luck in competing.